Okay.
Genesis 7Ds, I'm Nicole Forbes with our education for the day. We are learning all about plants that make sense. And if you are not reading the words of the title of this class, that's SCENTS, which is, we're talking all about fragrant plants. Again, this is a better class done in person, and it's just Becky and I in the employee break room here at the Lake Oswego store, which is filled with some blooming fragrant plants that are here on site at the garden center. And stepping into this room is like stepping into just a mixing bowl of all kinds of crazy smells and scents. So you all at home, be sure to activate your smell-o-vision by pressing on the button on your controller so that you can smell everything that's going on, or come on down to the garden center. We are open to the public, and these plants are begging to go home with you. So it's a little bit of a different class because rather than talking about a specific plant, we have a large palette of plants to talk about. And so I want to talk about fragrance just for a moment because, honestly, it's one of the characteristics that we all look for in our garden plants. And it's one of those things that one of those senses, that can transform us and take us to another time and place often. Scent is one of the primary senses that can bring up even memory. So it taps into childhood, brings up visual, auditorial, even all kinds of other thoughts and memories when we smell a certain fragrance. So scent can be very powerful in our environment, and really in the garden sets a whole new level of enjoyment to beyond just the visual. I love to listen to my garden, to see the garden, to smell the garden, and so of course, as you all know, I also taste the garden when I harvest. So adding another sense with scent, I'm going to stop that, really makes a big difference in just your enjoyment. So what you will see is we're a little better on our game this week after probably taking a week off. Last week, I hope everyone had a nice Mother's Day weekend. We saw a lot of you at the garden center, so thanks for mentioning, by the way, when you come in and you see me, that you're enjoying the classes. Obviously, with no more in-person classes at the moment, I don't get the kind of feedback that I normally do when you're here and I see your faces and I'm able to sell you plants. So when you mention you're enjoying the classes, it really does make my day. So thanks a lot for mentioning that. And so when you see the handout that we have been able to attach preemptively instead of after the video this time, you should be able to click on the link and see our blog on fragrant plants. The content is organized this time as a calendar of fragrance. So you're welcome on that. It's giving you the opportunity to have something blooming and fragrant in your garden 12 months out of the year, and it's possible, and there's quite a few plants that start on one month's list and go on to another month, and even just depending on the season that we have, things are early this year, so we've had some warm weather that's caused a lot of flowers to bloom ahead of schedule. We're approximately 2 weeks ahead according to my vast collection of garden journals and data recording that I have done over the years. The lilacs are finished blooming ahead of schedule, but roses are blooming ahead of schedule. So we see often, with this type of calendar, you've got to give me a little bit of leeway on, it says that lilacs are blooming in May. It's May and they're not in bloom anymore, but that's because they bloomed a little bit early. So maybe give a week to 2 weeks plus or minus on these guys when you read these bloom lists, and don't, plan your wedding date and the flowers that should be in bloom all to coincide on such critical issues such as the fickleness of nature and her bloom times. But using this as a guideline is a great way to, again, make sure that you are taking full advantage of the range of plants that provide us with fragrance in the garden, as well as stretching out the seasons in which you can enjoy those scents. So a few of the plants that I've brought into the class space today are no longer in bloom because they are winter bloomers. And winter bloomers, many of us are familiar with winter Daphne or Daphne odora. And Daphne odora, like odor is in the name. And it's a great odor, so not all odors are bad, I suppose, but Daphne odora blooms like around daffodil season. So February is often when the Daphne is flowering, and Daphne is one of those just classic blooming plants that most people covet and adore. It's I don't have it's not a garden if I don't have a Daphne kind of idea. So Daphne is one that many of us know, highly fragrant, early season blooming, and because those winter bloomers add so much benefit to us, their fragrance and their location needs to be up, in the winter, for example, to areas where we frequent. So a Daphne at the far, far, far back section of your garden, maybe not as enjoyable to you as a Daphne near your driveway, your walkway, the door that you step out to take the garbage out or, empty the compost bin. That's a great one to have fragrance, right? Stinky compost chores, at least you're passing something that smells nice while you're doing it. So putting those winter bloomers near the house perimeter, near your traffic pathways is a smarter choice than, locating them all out and around the garden. Whereas in summer, we have more, we're sitting in the patio, we may be enjoying decks that we can add fragrance to those areas, and having things blooming when we're further out and enjoying the garden makes more sense out in those areas. So location and just thoughtfulness as far as when it blooms and how much you'll be able to enjoy it is a critical factor to how much you'll really notice. But on the other hand, of course, as these plants all have needs and growth requirements, we of course need to respect their needs at the same time. So as I get into talking about Daphne, we'll talk about what conditions Daphne likes to grow in so that we are sure that we're matching the grow conditions that Daphne prefers and maximizing the location of it in our garden designs so that we have the maximum travel passage when the plant is in bloom, for example. So to back up, believe it or not, many of us are familiar with the color wheel, right? And how colors are described, colors correspond with one another, and a lot of cooks and food lovers are also aware of like the classification of flavors, right? Sweet, savory, all of that. Fragrance has a similar kind of wheel or classification, which gives us the ability to talk about it and have scent references that we can kind of share and understand one another. So it was in the early 80s that this like fragrance wheel basically was devised, and it really was to help retailers, whether it were perfumeries or garden center employees, rose growers, to enable us to be able to talk about fragrances and scents and categorize them in different ways, because not all smells are equal. And of course, just because it has a fragrance doesn't necessarily mean that you and I both will enjoy that fragrance. So smell can be very individual as well as very varied in just kind of the different kinds of scents and fragrances. So you never get to see our lovely camera woman, Becky, but Becky and I this morning were talking about the joy of all of the different fragrances, and that she and I both tend to prefer a woodsy fragrance, which is more of a musk or a woodsy scent. So think about walking in the forest and that deep breathing smell of just kind of life. It has some decay involved in it too. So we were joking that I had found a perfume that I like, and when I read the ingredients, go figure, it had some dirt and some moss in it, as well as some cedar oil, and I thought, well, it's just very suitable that I feel comfortable smelling like dirt. But I'm not a rose. I'm a clump of moss. That's just how I like to smell. So it's very individualistic as far as your fragrant kind of tendencies go. But the fragrance wheel that was developed includes floral, spicy, woodsy, and fresh. And I know that just like flavors, there are blends, there are smells that really sit on the edge of, is that spicy or fresh? Is that woodsy or floral? So again, your nose may kind of tailor your own fragrance wheel for you, but floral is the most popular scent. So floral, of course, is the fragrance that we get from roses. In most roses, now some roses have a musk scent to them as well, so we can't, blanket statement even just the fragrance for roses, but that classic rose fragrance that we think of. Lilies have a floral scent. Daphne again has a floral scent. So floral scents are probably one of the most popular. Spicy aromas are often like that vanilla or clovey smell. One of the classic spicy aromas comes from carnations or plants in the dianthus family, which just have a wonderful clovey scent or clovey aroma, but I'll show you some others that have that great scent as well. Often it's a plant's foliage that's fragrant too, and we were squeezing and smelling plants this morning, so I have all kinds of mixed aromas on my hands, but some plants, not only the flower but the foliage, like this Mexican orange. This is a cute little leaf of Mexican orange, which the foliage itself, when crushed, has a really cool smell. In addition to the fact that the flowers, which the name alludes to, have a scent like an orange or a citrus flower does. So often the flower could be floral, but the foliage could be spicy. So we have neat blends of smells that plants can provide at the same time. And woodsy smells come naturally from conifers. So cedars, junipers have a great woodsy scent. And then a lot of herbs, the crushed foliage or fragrance of herbs such as lavender, rosemary, or that herb scent is actually like a subcategory of woodsy. So if that makes sense when you kind of start thinking about how hard it is to not only describe a smell, but to really categorize all of these, was probably like one of those sommeliers, on out of a job, or a super sniffer, or whatever all these people are called that can smell really great different smells. Fresh smells are the last one, and fresh smells include citrus and fruity aromas, like some of those like irises. I don't know if you've smelled some of those bearded irises, go down to like Shriners when they're in bloom. You can walk through and smell an iris that smells just like grape soda. So fruity aromas, which, or Kool-Aid. I always think that the yellow primroses that bloom in late winter, early spring smell like, what do I always say they smell like? Sweet tarts. So like a candy, just a sweet candy smell. So that's a fruity aroma for you. I really wish you guys were here. I just have to say I miss you all, and talking about smells and smelling all of these smells and not able to pass these plants around is killing me, as I'm sure it is you. So let's wave some plants around. So starting in the winter, okay, there's nothing blooming anymore on some of these winter blooming plants, and I'll hold it up, you don't have to, but there's nothing blooming anymore on this plant, but there are huge advantages to winter blooming plants, and one of the huge advantages is that the cooler weather often keeps a plant flowering for longer. So, a rose in flower only lasts so long before the rose petals start to fade, and then they shatter, and then there goes the rose, right? If you think about what a florist does to preserve flowers, they put them in a cooler. So the cooler the weather, often the longer the flower lasts. However, warmth tends to bring fragrance out of flowers more frequently than cold weather does. So bringing, a fragrant plant outside, if you bring a snip of it inside, often just is amplified in the house. And a lot of us are familiar with that, with the aromatherapy little heater things that make all the oils come out. It's fragrant, but I didn't bring it in. There's a plant that blooms in the very, very early spring, if not late winter. It's an Oregon native. Many of us have seen it. It's called skunk cabbage. Obviously, I didn't bring it into the room because it does smell like skunks. We actually don't have any in stock. It's very large when it starts to grow its leaves. But it sleeps all winter under even snow-covered areas. And the flower that comes up can create chemical reaction inside it to melt snow and create enough heat as it melts the snow that it then wafts its kind of stinky aroma far and wide. So a flower even that realizes that it's got to warm itself up with a chemical reaction to send its scent around is kind of, mind-blowing. But again, my mind is blown by plants on the daily, so I just have to share with you guys some of the cool stuff that they do. So they have even recorded those skunk cabbages of getting up into 90 degrees, just enough to melt that snow and burst out of snow-covered areas. At home, one of my favorite winter bloomers is a small tree, big shrub, let's say, and I recently planted it out in my parking strip as like a street tree. And it's this little guy here. It's called Azera microphylla. So I just have a cute little youngster here. But Azera microphylla, also called boxleaf Azera, it's a really sweet evergreen plant that can get up to 15 feet tall or so can become tree-sized. It's still hanging on. I just see bare remnants of flowers. The blooms are small and yellow, and they're tucked along the stem of the plant. So they're not dangled out on the edges of the branches, but they're tucked along the stem. So you really have to get in kind of intimately to smell it. But it's so worth it because so coworker Sean says they smell like Ovaltine. I think it smells somewhere between like a Hershey bar and like a bottle of vanilla from the spice cabinet. So it's, some people say vanilla, some people say chocolate, some people even just say white chocolate. Who cares, right? It smells amazing, and it blooms in like February, and it's great. So it's, my husband says it smells like a bakery when it's in bloom, and I love that. So Azera microphylla, early blooming, January often. Some of these winter flowers are not the kind of flower that you're going to be like, you got to come over here and see this flower blooming. You're not going to take Instagram pictures of them like you would some of the other flashy blooms. The Azera flower is tiny and almost unnoticeable. And then you stand there and go, oh my gosh, what are you cooking? So you're just smelling this great smell instead. Same goes for, is it on my list too? I'm trying to help by following along. Okay, next, Sarcococa. So also a January bloomer. This is like a workhorse plant. So Sarcococa, also called sweet box, is a shade lover. So where Azera takes partial sun, even full sun, Sarcococa likes shade. It can have a little bit of morning sun, and then it should have shade from the hot afternoon. There are two primary forms. So there's a low habit Sarcococa that's more of a ground cover, 6-8 inches tall or so, and then spreads several feet. And then there's a taller growing Sarcococa, which can get up to 3 to 5 feet tall and wide. But both of them are easily kind of controlled or shaped. The common name on this is sweet box because it has a wonderful sweet aroma and it can be treated somewhat like boxwood or box, you know, so it can be shaped and kind of manicured. Another one of those flowers that kind of looks like thread, you know, kind of coming off of your shirt or whatever. It's just a little bit of white stringy flower, highly fragrant. You stand there and go, again, what smells so great, and realize that it's the Sarcococa. So dry shade is even an area that it is tolerant of growing in. So think of, you know, areas where you've got dry shade. Love to put this up against like a foundation planting in a house where maybe you're getting morning sun and afternoon shade up front. Near your doorway, you're going to stand there and, you know, smell this wonderful fragrance as you're coming and going in and out of the house. So great plant, sweet box or Sarcococa. And into February, we go to Daphne and Daphne odora. So as I mentioned, odor, right in the name, and this odor is a good one. Daphne and plants in the Daphne family are just renowned for their fragrance. We had lots of people buying Mother's Day Daphne gifts. I didn't mention, or did I? Sarcococa is evergreen. The Azera, evergreen. Daphne is also evergreen, the Daphne odora specifically. So another plant that prefers morning sun and afternoon shade. So not extremely heat tolerant. Ideally, it should be kind of dappled sun or protected from the hot afternoon sun. And what we're looking at here, you have two kind of distinct foliage on these Daphnes. You see them good? Got me holding them up. This is Daphne marginata. And then we have kind of a relatively new cultivar of Daphne called Majima. So a really bright variegation on the leaf on Majima. Kind of doesn't even make this one look variegated at all, but you have to look closely at the detail on marginata to see that it has a tiny creamy edge at the very edges of its green leaves. Now both of these plants have a pink flower bud that opens to a really pale pink flower, highly fragrant, and definitely in that floral fragrance. One small spray or flower bud, you know, with a few blooms open of Daphne will scent an entire room all on its own. So really quite wonderful and fragrant. Couple of interesting things about Daphne. They need absolutely the best drainage possible. So they're not tolerant of mucky wet areas. You know, if you are planting it near the front door or your kind of foundation of your house, make sure that it's nowhere near where the gutter is going to come down and put water, you know, from your gutter. No, not by the hose, nowhere that gets excessively wet all the time. And just make sure as you're digging your hole and planting, by filling the hole with the hose and watching the water drain and seeing how quickly water drains before you go ahead and plant your Daphne plant, so that you don't find out later that it didn't like the hole that you dug because it fills with water. Does not like to have its roots disturbed, so as many of us would take a lot of these plants home, take it out of its pot, and you know, gardeners are kind of taught to like loosen up the root system, maybe even like cut it up a little, break it up, and then plant it. Don't do that with Daphne. It's one of those plants, let's just pretend it's ticklish. And if you start messing with the roots, it's like, and it just, often that's it for Daphne. So you'll know right away, because transplant shock is real and sudden. And buying plants have done us the 70s are trees and shrubs that are going to be planted in the ground. If you lose them within a year's time, we're going to guarantee it and give you another one. So if you do see that kind of sudden transplant shock, come back and tell us. But we try to prevent that by just giving you a little education off the top. The last thing about Daphne, it has a lifespan. It has a lifespan that's somewhat shorter than a lot of these other plants. A peony, for example, can live like the life of a human being. For example, 80 to 100 years of the life of the peony. Daphne's odora has a lifespan of about 30 years. So many of us may be in a home whose landscape is just coming to 30 years, for example. And if one day all of a sudden the Daphne just goes, it was doing great, it's been there for years, I don't know how old it is, and there it goes. It's very possible it was nothing that you did. You don't have to feel, the guilt. We all have a lifespan, and when Daphne hits it, you can just replant a new Daphne and start over again. So it's not necessarily like, oh, you can't plant another Daphne there. So just know they're ticklish in their roots. They have a lifespan. They of 30 years. They like good drainage. And I know that seems kind of fussy, but I put my hair all flipping around. Sorry, cutting a haircut. It seems fussy, but some of these fragrant plants are a little on the fussy side. And honestly, you got to work for the kind of reward that they give us. When we start talking about gardenias, goodness, they have like their whole own, meal kit. So some of these are divas, and divas require extra attention. So now I'll also say, never intend to fill your entire garden with divas, right? We can't have, it's possible to have too many divas in your life, and you can't keep up with the maintenance. So have just the right amount, that you're not blown away with maintenance and care requirements from needy plants, because there's a lot of other plants that are just workhorses, and smell great nonetheless. Let's see, did that tee me up to something awesome? Well, let's see. Okay, February's actually got a lot more. There's Pyrrhus, the Andromeda. They're on the tail end of bloom, but this is one of those plants that everybody seems to have a couple in their garden. They're evergreen. They look great with rhodies and azaleas. They like our acid soil. They're easy care. Honeybees love them. Other pollinators love them. And when they're in bloom, you walk by, it's not what you would expect. It's a very fresh floral scent. Oh, I can see I'm blending them. It's fresh and floral, but it is. It's a very fresh floral scent that isn't like perfumey, but it's just one of those, I don't know, like a soundtrack to spring in my nose. Pyrrhus. So you'll know it if you've got it and you've smelled it. You'll recognize it. Some are more fragrant than others. Andromeda is the common name for them. This is a dwarf variety, so of course you can have ones that are tall and ones that stay short. So this is a nice shorter variety, and they're on their way out of bloom. But Pyrrhus are tolerant of quite a bit, so sun to dappled light or filtered sun, and even a fair bit of shade. But with more and more shade, they won't flower very well. That's, then you won't have the fragrance, right? So on to March. Clearly in March we start seeing some of the bulbs come up. So like daffodils and their kind of fragrant cousins, Narcissus. If we think of paper whites that we maybe grew in the house for Christmas, those can to some people those can be over the top, too fragrant or too floral. Narcissus in general that grow outdoors have kind of a range of scents that are not quite as high note as the paper white scent is. So some of them can smell quite rich and buttery, and buttery, I don't know where that goes on the fragrance wheel, but maybe somebody can add buttery to the fragrance, because everybody likes butter, right? So Narcissus come and go as a flowering bulb. They're great to cut and bring in the house too, so they add lots of enjoyment. And then as I was showing you the Choicea ternata, this is a funky variety of Mexican orange. So Choicea ternata or Mexican orange, typically blooming more in March. Here we are in May, right? So I've got one that is in bloom. It's a slightly different variety than our standard Mexican orange. This is a variety called Aztec Pearl. So Aztec Pearl, it is showing some of its little flowers, which have a nice citrus floral type aroma, and then it's got that cool, spicy scent that the foliage has. Aztec Pearl gets about 3 to 4 feet tall, matures at about 6, so it can get fairly good size. Sun to dappled sun, and it is evergreen as well. So a cool texture. It's really a neat leaf compared to the standard Choicea ternata. This leaf is like thinner and kind of longer. So if you are familiar with the other plant, that's how this one compares. We're still in, okay, let's go to April. There's lots of good stuff. April, Father Gilla, we start seeing lilacs come out, and come on. Of course, Father Gilla is finished blooming, but Father Gilla is a lovely plant. Common name. I don't know. It might be like, it's not honeybush. I'm not sure what Father Gilla's common name is. You can see what's left of the blooms. So they're little kind of like bottle brush or pipe cleaner type blooms, white. They have a sweet honey scent. So I would say that that's probably floral, right? But floral fresh. And maybe I'm making a hybrid category, but floral fresh is their scent. And then this is a deciduous plant, so we're starting to see some new growth come out. And the new growth is, again, this nice coppery color, and then it's going to age to a green. Father Gilla is best in filtered light or some shade. This is a variety called Mount Airy, which can get up to 5-6 feet tall and wide. And great fall color on Father Gilla. So you'll see a rainbow of yellow, burgundy, orange, purples, and a little bit of green as the plants kind of, slows down in fall and starts to get ready to drop its leaves in the winter time. So Mount Airy, Father Gilla, wonderful honey scent in April, and is now about finished blooming. I almost forgot. No, I'll come to that when we get to November, when we go all around the calendar. Okay. So then May, now we have things blooming now. So lilacs, of course, they started blooming in April. They're mostly wound up or wound down at this point here in mid-May, but there's a variety of lilac. I didn't bring any lilacs in, but there is a variety of lilac that we sold through the inventory we had on site for Mother's Day weekend. We're restocking, but it is a re-blooming lilac. So we've got the European lilacs that have all finished now, grow to be pretty good sized shrubs, even small trees. Then we have a lilac called Miss Kim, which is a Korean lilac. It's 6 to 8 feet tall and just makes a rounded bush. And that one's actually blooms a couple weeks past the European lilac. Smaller spray with a little bit finer, more delicate flower. And it doesn't have such a range of colors. Usually there's like a light, kind of a pale lavender color, or lilac is a color, right? So it could be lilac color. No, it's kind of a smarty pants answer, but, and then it goes into like a pink. So really a pale purple into a pink. And that Miss Kim, or Korean lilac, has been bred now in a variety of re-blooming lilacs that's called bloomerang. So think, the boomerang. So re-blooming bloomerang lilac flowers at least 2 or 3 times during the kind of spring and summer months. So bloomerang's in flower now, and then it kind of takes a little bit of a break in its flower cycle, starts to bloom again, another break, and then flowers again. So wonderful fragrance. Bloomerang again is in that, I think, 6 to 8, maybe 4 to 6 rounded size. Deciduous, so it drops its leaves in the winter just like the other lilacs do. And a really, really wonderful one to add to your garden for more of a shrub instead of more of a tree. Behind me, also blooming here in May, well, you can't really ignore this peony any longer. Peonies are showing up all over, like my Facebook feed. Everyone's showing pictures of them right now. This is an Ito peony, isn't it? Yes, this is one of the Ito varieties. So this is a really kind of recent introduction from Japan that's just extremely sturdy, kind of a hybrid between tree peonies and herbaceous peonies. Giant blooms, highly floral scented, kind of a spicy and floral fragrance. Tons of flower buds as well. So this must have, I don't know, 25, 30 flower buds on it, and each flower is bigger than my hand. So a gorgeous example of the kind of stunning range, I guess, that you have on peonies. But in my garden right now, probably one of the most fragrant plants that is blooming currently in my garden. And I tell you that this little plant, vine, blooms from May through October, which is darn near one of the longest flowering acts that plants can do. This is honeysuckle, and honeysuckle is a fresh floral scent. I would say more fresh even than floral. Honeysuckle is a fairly fast-growing vine that can take full sun to filtered sun. It can cover 15-20 feet and just wraps around. It would stand long enough and it would wrap around that post right here and just climb up anything that it could get its little tendrils around. And if you had, well, I don't want to make a judgment call. I was about to say if you had a decent childhood. That's not nice to say. If you had a childhood like mine, which was more than decent, thanks Mom, then you know how to enjoy a honeysuckle by suckling the honey that it makes. So one tiny little flower on honeysuckle, kind of a cool thing too, is they come out, there's a new one. So they come out white and then they age to a butter yellow or a creamy yellow. So this is a newer flower, and this flower has been around for a couple of days. They still smell just as good, but we want the yellow ones to get the honey from. And you have a tiny little green, this is important, so everybody pay attention. Tiny little green piece that comes, kind of attaches to the back of the flower. And you want to partially remove with your fingernail that little green thing, but not so much that you take that inner string completely apart. So you see it? Okay. So, and now, I don't know if this is, we didn't practice this, guys, but there's a little drip. Yes, there it is. Tiny little drip of nectar that comes out. You probably can't see the nectar, but I'm gonna suckle it. So you have to pull that thread all the way. It kind of has a little knot at the end, and as the knot comes through, it forces a little bit of nectar out the end of the flower. And when you taste it, it tastes like flower power. Like honey, like a floral honey. Like I'm 9 years old again. I don't know what it tastes like, but go suckle your honeysuckle or buy a honeysuckle so that you can show someone else how to do that, because really you haven't lived until you enjoy things like that. Now, in addition to the honeysuckle already blooming right now, we have roses. I mean, there are so many roses to talk about and show. Some roses have more fragrance than others. When they're in bloom, you can walk through and really get, a nose full and decide which ones you like the best. Clearly, something like this rose here, which is named Fragrant Cloud, is going to be a fragrant rose. So, it's open that you can be confirmed that it is fragrant, but Fragrant Cloud is a good one and a really pretty color. So come sniff through the rose bushes by all means. We have another honeysuckle up here that I'm not going to wrestle out of the back, but honeysuckles come in a couple of different colors. I really think that the Halls variety here, although it might not be as flashy as the Gold Flame and some of the others, its muted colors are made up for by a higher fragrance and a longer bloom time. So I think Halls smells the best. Already blooming now, but really a little bit ahead of schedule, we have gardenias. So again, I promised that I would mention gardenias because you can't really talk about fragrant plants without talking about gardenias. There are a variety of gardenias, some of which do not survive in the Pacific Northwest's rainy and cold winters. So we do have access to a handful of cultivars of what we call hardy gardenias, which really include this variety here, which is called Climbs, K-L-E-I-M-S, Climbs Hardy Gardenia. And Climbs has this slightly smaller, single bloom, so a flat flower that just has a single layer of petals. It is wonderfully fragrant, so no less fragrant than, and yeah, see, I'm smelling it. But a lot of us think of a classic gardenia as a big swirl of white petals, more like a rosebud, a non-single flower, more of a double flower. That flower form is available in a hardy gardenia variety known as frost proof. Sounds like a good one for our climate, right? So frost proof gardenia. There is also another variety called Chuck Hayes, and that cultivar is another full kind of double flower, wonderfully fragrant. And the plant's sizes, kind of growth habit at maturity, it kind of varies from cultivar to cultivar. So Climbs Hardy is one of the shortest as well, kind of a 2 to 3 foot tall and wide. But I'll tell you, so I said they're divas, right? So gardenias, they like consistency. They want, they like bright light and good sun, but the more intense hot afternoon sun on them can kind of like burn up their flowers fast and even kind of dry up the fragrance in their flowers. So like, you know, a little bit of sun is nice, but not too much sun is, you know, its first like challenge, right? Because you don't want to put them in shade, then you won't really have flowers. Then they have a very specific flavor preference and diet. They have a high metabolism, so they are heavy feeders, or we could just say they're like always hungry. So part of the consistency of their care, they want regular watering at kind of measured intervals, and they need a regular feeding to keep them blooming and happy.
What was the name of that gardenia you just showed again?
This is Climbs Hardy. So think like climbing a ladder, but with a K and no B at the end. K-L-E-I-M, like mom. So they're acid-loving plants. We have natively acid soil here in the Pacific Northwest, but they like it even a little bit more acidic. And then when you fertilize them, you would be best to fertilize with food that is specific to acid-loving plants. So here's our GMB rhododendron azalea and camellia fertilizer. So this is for acid lovers, a granular form, a little longer lasting. And then we also have a liquid. Lots of us are familiar with the Miracle Grow label. Well, Miracle Grow makes a liquid fertilizer for acid-loving plants. So it's called Mere Acid. And this is like a powder you'd mix into water and water it in to the plant. So either one or both is great for a gardenia because not only, like I said, they have a very specific diet, but they're like always hungry. So the more you feed them, the more you'll get this deep green foliage, repeat flowers, more blooms, that kind of thing. There are some insects that'll bother gardenias, so you can get a spider mite. There are occasionally a caterpillar or two that'll come and glue some leaves together or eat some of the leaves. So troubleshooting is always best done, through experts at Dennis M&D. So send us pictures or come in person, and we'll walk you through some of the issues that you're having. I wouldn't landscape my entire garden in gardenias, but a few choicefully placed throughout the garden in areas where you sit or spend a lot of time can really make a great impact in just overall enjoyment. Now, this guy's small and I almost forgot about it, but when you talk about gardenias, like fragrance in the garden, there are some top tier plants. And there's tons of fragrant plants, tons on the list, but gardenias, classic fragrance for plants. Jasmine, classic fragrant plant. And roses. I would say, gardenia, jasmine, roses will probably be our top 3, not only for height of fragrance or intensity of fragrance, but they aren't, lilacs are great, right? But they bloom for, if we're lucky, they bloom for like a month, and then lilacs are done for the year, unless you've got one of these reblooming varieties. But blooming May to October, the jasmine this is ahead of schedule. My jasmine, I have just one open flower right now in Portland, Oregon. This came from California and probably has a little bit of a head start on us. But jasmine will often bloom from May or June all the way through, well through August and sometimes into September. So again, you're looking at incredibly long bloom time. Roses, same, usually June through September, easily into October. Sometimes roses are still flowering at Christmas. And gardenias typically are starting to bloom towards the end of May or early June, and then they go on and give us that wonderful kind of, as long as we feed those gardenias and give them that performance care that they need, they will perform for us throughout the summer months. So not only are these kind of the top known for high fragrance, but that they repeat bloom to give us that high performance of flowers and then more flowers, of course. So, what else is up here? Oh, heavy. I want to talk about this butterfly bush because not only is it a nice looking plant and it's got a great flower and a great scent, but butterfly bushes have been around for quite a while, and if you've been gardening for a while, you may also realize that for several years, maybe around the year 2000 or something like that, butterfly bushes were listed as an invasive species in Oregon specifically, and they were banned. They were made illegal in the state because when the flower finishes, it made a seed in the flower head, and the seed would spread and grow on its own in places that weren't intended to grow butterfly bushes. And they grew fast and became almost tree-sized. So butterfly bushes were banned. There's no butterfly bush police, no one's patrolling, but we couldn't sell them any longer for several years. And while we couldn't sell them, plant breeders realized this is a great plant. Butterflies are attracted to it, it smells good, it's easy care, long blooming. So they bred varieties or cultivars of butterfly bush that are sterile, which means that their seed cannot spread. And while they were kind of working with the plants, they made them more compact, which was great for a lot of people who, could only fit a smaller plant in their garden and didn't have room for something so large. So this is a variety called Miss Violet. Miss Violet is compact, sterile, grows about 5 by 5. Full sun is going to be best for a butterfly bush, although they'll take partial sun, they just won't flower as strongly. And again, this plant will flower through the summer and give you that wonderful, even fun to cut. They don't last the longest when they're cut, but just a great flower to add to the garden and a little bit of height and kind of free motion as well. They do come in a range of colors, so that's also fun. And sure, I grabbed some lavender, and yes, I have some perennials down here, but we were all kind of smelling these two annuals, and you'll see kind of towards the end of the blog I mentioned some fragrant perennials and some fragrant annuals, but one of the most fragrant annuals is this Midnight Madness Petunia. So it is, it's odd that one specific color of Petunia smells so much more intensely than other colors of petunias, but I challenge you to prove me wrong and find that there's another color of petunia that smells better than Midnight Madness. But so Midnight Madness here, it's like our grandmas grew this. Same with Sweet Alyssum. Both of these are really old-fashioned, but still around because they smell great and they've got great staying power. Sweet Alyssum, if you remember from our container class, is also a great attractor for pollinators. It's just a nice kind of border plant. Often will spread itself by seed, so it comes back from seed in the garden too. And then Midnight Madness petunias will grow up to be about a foot tall and wide, so a nice 6-pack like this is going to cover quite a bit of ground. And sometimes you'll see them in hanging baskets as well, and just that kind of overhead fragrance of the hanging basket with a couple in a pot near you. This is like a peppery, spicy fragrance that is just really wonderful as well. So sorry that your smell-o-vision isn't working today. We need to get Facebook to maybe work on that, although things could go terribly wrong with smell-o-vision too, right? So you'll have to come and smell these in person. Last one, as we circle around the calendar, and I skipped a few months, but we get to like November. What's blooming in November, right? Anything? Yes, there are. And They're no longer blooming at this point in the year, but this is one of those plants that you might walk past during the summer or spring and completely not notice. When it is in flower, it's October, November, so it blooms in the fall. It is one of those, as I already said, I like that musky, kind of spicy aroma. It has this wonderfully musk fragrance or scent to it. This is called Eleagnus. It's also known as Fragrant Olive or Sweet Olive or Russian Olive are some of the names of it. This is a variety called Gilt Edge. Eleagnus is a super, super tough shrub. Great for privacy screens even. So durable. Full sun, full shade. It does develop a little bit of a thorn over time, so it could be like privacy and security screening. Its little flower after it finishes blooming, which is like a ½ inch of a little waxy bell that hangs like hidden in the plant. So again, it's one of those that you're like, where's that smell coming from? After the flowers, sometimes you have a little fruit that's formed that sort of looks like an olive. So there's the name. It's not an olive, but it makes a little thing that kind of looks like an olive. And then this is an evergreen leaf as well. So drought tolerant, deer resistant, winter, fall to winter blooming, highly fragrant. Why doesn't everyone have it? Because it grows pretty big. So you could see this plant easily get like 9-10 feet tall and wide. And if you prune it like at the wrong time, like summer, you'll prune off the flower buds that would be blooming in the fall. So there's a little bit of a trick to growing this plant and having it in bloom. But even better if you just put it in a place where it can grow as big as it wants and be all it can be, and then you're able to enjoy the fragrance from it. So Eleagnus, and you'll see that, you should see that on your November list, I think. And then, oh, this is the big heavy one, and we'll be wrapping up after this. Winter blooming Camellia. Now, a lot of you may have familiarity with the red flowering winter blooming Camellia known as Yuletide. Yuletide Camellia looks very similar to this variety, so it's a single bloom, bright red with a yellow center. This is a similar variety. In fact, it is, it's like the daughter of Yuletide, or it could be the son of Yuletide. Just because it's pink, it doesn't mean it's its daughter, right? This is called Pinkaboo, and Pinkaboo is even more of a floral fragrance. Yuletide has a mild fragrance, but Pinkaboo is really a fragrant camellia. So this is one of those that blooms from often Thanksgiving through close to the new year. So again, several months because it's blooming in the winter time and the flowers last a lot longer. Wonderfully fragrant, and all of these winter bloomers are really important not only for the early pollinators that wake up, but think about the hummingbirds that spend the winter here. They really, start to relax their requirements on what makes a good hummingbird flower. Doesn't have to be tubular or red or anything like that. When there's not a lot blooming, a hummingbird's got to still eat. So they'll visit the camellias. Pinkaboo is a wonderful one for that. And we're looking at a decent sized evergreen shrub that does best in like full to partial sun. Yuletide camellia and Pinkaboo camellia both can get 8 to 10 feet tall and wide. Although they're moderate growers, they're easily kept within that 8-foot range. And then there are some shorter blooming, winter blooming camellias as well that I did not bring in today. But on the floor, I can't even pull them up. I've got lilies, lots of great perennials that you'll see also on the blog. I don't really call them out as perennials necessarily, but as you're reading on the list, you'll see things like lily of the valley, fragrant, the stargazer lilies or fragrant lilies. Heck, I could keep going, but let's just wrap it up with that. Thank you all so much for watching. I will answer any questions that you put in the comments below if we haven't answered them before now. And tune in next week if you're interested in learning how to care for indoor cactus and succulents. Thanks again.